This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzahon, and it's Friday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. At least, that's what the majority of the videos in this series do. Sometimes I'd like to look at the opposite end of the spectrum and talk about the worst Magic cards ever printed, and that's what we're going to be doing today, with a look at the worst 1-mana creatures. Now, you might be thinking, how can a 1-mana creature be bad? After all, how much should we really expect for paying a single mana? And that's kind of true, but the cards on this list all fall very short of giving you a full card's worth of value, and you should certainly expect that out of your 1-drop creatures. As usual, this type of list isn't entirely driven by data, like the lists that look at the best cards. Instead, the cards that appear on this list and where they rank is based on my own opinion. However, I use some data to help me make my selections. For one thing, a card can't have ever top 8'd an important Magic event, and it also can't widely be played in EDH. For the EDH data, I use EDH Rec, which has a database of over 250,000 decks. Additionally, the cards on this list are also terrible and limited. Obviously enough, to be eligible for this list, a card had to be a creature with a mana value of 1. There are 943 1-mana creatures in Magic, and in this video I'll be giving you my picks for the 10 worst ones ever to be put on cardboard. Alright, let's dive into the list. At number 10, I've got Waterworm. That's right, this is a 1-mana 1/1 with upside, and it still made the list. In fact, the bottom 3 cards on this list are all 1-mana 1/1s with upside, but the upside they have is so minimal that they're pretty close to being vanilla 1-mana 1/1s, and guess what? A 1-mana 1/1 that doesn't do anything is a horrible Magic card. You just don't get enough out of such a card to make it worth playing, especially in a world where there are plenty of 1-drops that either have better stats or come with more relevant upside. Anyway, in the case of Waterworm, the upside it has is that it gets +0/+1 if your opponent controls an island. That's the kind of thing you have little control over most of the time, and even if you're interested in being a deck that makes the opponent's lands into islands, this isn't the payoff you're running in your deck. It just doesn't do enough. At number 9, it is Aceling Leprechaun. As promised, this is another 1-mana 1/1 that technically has upside, but like with Waterworm, the upside it offers is so minimal that it isn't that far from being a vanilla 1-mana 1/1. In the case of the Leprechaun, it turns any creature that blocks it or that it blocks into a green creature. This does actually change a creature and it does it permanently, but there are so few advantages to be gained out of such an effect that it isn't just worth it on a 1-mana 1/1, who will just be chump blocking or chump attacking for this incredibly minimal upside. At number 8, I've got Balduvian Shaman. Our last 1-mana 1/1 with basically non-existent upside, Balduvian Shaman's ability is downright comical because it has one of the most complicated yet useless abilities of all time. It's so comical that I think we really need to read the Oracle text. The Shaman can tap and change the text to target white enchantment you control that doesn't have cumulative upkeep by replacing all instances of one color word with another. That enchantment gains cumulative upkeep 1. That's right, the upside here is that the Shaman can change a color word on a white enchantment. That might be kind of funny with something like Circle of Protection, and that's definitely what was intended when they designed this, and that's a very narrow use, but at least it's something. However, the fact that it also tacks cumulative upkeep 1 to the card pretty much undoes anything good this card might have been able to do, since that means you have to pay 1 mana, and then 2 mana, and then 4 mana on your upkeeps to keep the card in play, and that's not going to be worth it, and you're not going to have mana to use your Circle of Protection anyway. So yeah, the Shaman is one of the most narrow effects ever, altering a color word on a white enchantment, but it doesn't even do a good job of it, because tacking cumulative upkeep onto a card is a horrible thing. At number 7, I have Muckrats, a vanilla 1-mana 1/1. This is even worse than the cards we've looked at so far, because at least those cards had very narrow upside. The rats are sort of a stand-in for any vanilla 1-mana 1/1, but the other ones actually have useful creature types. And while it isn't optimal to play Mons, Goblin, Raiders, I would argue that the creature type upside of Goblin is more of an upside than any of the cards we've looked at so far, and the same is true for vanilla 1-mana 1/1 humans, merfolk, and slivers. They have upside, even if they technically have nothing in the text box as a result of dozens of cards that care about their creature type. With Muckrats, well, there just isn't enough tribal support for it to have upside. Sure, there is some tribal stuff out there for rats, but none of it is so good that a vanilla 1-mana 1/1 is actually worth a slot in your deck. There is a possibility that that could change one day as new cards are printed. In fact, Dwarven Trader probably would have been on this list a few years ago, but now that both Magda and Apala exist, I think the Dwarf type has some significant upside. So yeah, Muckrats is one of the worst 1-drops there is, and keep in mind, this is coming from someone who has 2 pet rats. The card does have some pretty great art though. At number 6, I've got Goblin Spy, and as a useful creature type, or it may have been even higher on this list. This 1-mana 1/1 makes you play with the top card of your library revealed. Now, this is information both you and your opponent get to have, but I think it's more downside than it is upside. The information will generally be far more helpful for your opponent than it is for you, since once the card is in your hand, you're going to know what the card was anyway. But once you draw that card, your opponent now has knowledge of what's in your hand, and they'll have that knowledge until you cast that card, so they get a ton of information out of your Goblin Spy, which I guess is flavorful once you take a look at the flavor text. He doesn't really seem sure who he's supposed to be spying on. At number 5, I've got Muvolan Ooze. This starts out as a 1-mana 1/1, and then it gets progressively bigger throughout the game. Sounds pretty good when I put it that way, right? Well, unfortunately, the way that it gets larger is from cumulative upkeep. We've already talked about how big of a downside that is in this video, so I won't go deep on it again, but suffice it to say, this creature won't be around for long due to the massive amount of mana you sink into it. And while it might feel sort of decent on turn 2, since at that point you will have spent 3 mana on a 3/3 that's actually attacking that turn, after that it's going to be virtually impossible to keep in play, and even if you could keep it around, it isn't worth it. It's better to just add other things to your board than sink all of your mana into this thing. At number 4, I've got Crazed Goblin. Like Goblin Spy, if it didn't have the Goblin type, it would be way higher on this list because its text box is entirely downside. It's a 1-mana 1/1 that has to attack every turn. Obviously, with a body of that size, that means it's going to die very quickly without even trading for another card. There's really no sensible reason to play this, especially because there are so many goblins in Magic. I'm not really sure what the 81 people who are using the Goblin on EDHREC are thinking. At number 3, I've got Merchant Ship. This is a 1-mana 0/2, but hey, it has some stuff in its text box. Surely it'll be good, right? No. Like a lot of older blue creatures, Merchant Ship is obsessed with islands. It can't attack if your opponent doesn't have one, and it dies if you don't control any. Yeah, that's a pretty narrow use already, but at least it does something when it doesn't get blocked. It gains you 2 life, and doesn't do any damage at all. So basically what we have here is a 0/2 with a massive downside and virtually no upside to speak of. At number 2, it is Alabaster Leech. Unlike most cards on this list, it actually has some decent stats. After all, it's a 1-mana 1/3. Unfortunately, it comes with an absolutely massive downside. It makes your white spells cost an additional white mana. Playing this on turn 1 is virtually a death sentence for you, as you will be drastically slowing down the rest of your game and giving your opponent a major advantage. And sure, if your deck has 0 other white spells in it, you can negate the disadvantage, but the upside here isn't really enough for it to be worth doing that to your deck in the first place. Anytime I talk about this card, I think it's pretty funny to compare it to Staunch Shieldmate, as it is the same card at common without the downside. And at number 1, I have Flailing Soldier. Like Alabaster Leech, it starts out with some good stats. In this case, you get a 1-mana 2/2. However, any player can pay a single mana to either give the soldier +1/+1 or -1/-1. This means that you're basically handing your opponent removal that doesn't cost them a card when you play this. They can just pay 2 mana at any time to take it down. And sure, if you have mana available too, things can get sort of silly, but it is still eventually going to die without ever really accomplishing anything. Maybe your opponent pays some mana, but that's a pretty small cost. At least Alabaster Leech and Merchant Ship are bodies that will stick around on the board and maybe block. Flailing Soldier, meanwhile, won't do anything. So those are my picks for the 10 worst 1-mana creatures in the history of Magic. If you want to own any of these terrible cards, check out the description, where you'll find a direct Card Kingdom link for each of them. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including a lot more on worst cards ever, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. And lastly, if you like the channel and you want to go the extra mile in supporting it, you can do that on Patreon. Thanks for watching.